I thought my dad was my hero until I found his secret. Growing up, I thought my dad was invincible. He was everything I wanted to be: strong, confident, and capable. He was the person who had all the answers, who could fix anything, from broken toys to emotional problems. I was never scared when he was around. I always felt safe in his presence, knowing that no matter what happened, he could protect me. He was my hero. I remember weekends when we'd go hiking or fishing, just the two of us, away from the noise and the chaos of life. He'd tell me stories about his childhood, how he grew up in a small town, and how he had to fight for everything he had. To me, he was larger than life. He was my role model, the man I would always turn to for advice. Nothing could ever change that, but everything I thought I knew about my dad changed the day I found the letters. It all started when I was cleaning out my father's old office. He had recently retired, and I was helping my mom with some of the things he had left behind: papers, old books, photos. As I sorted through the dusty boxes, I stumbled upon an old leather-bound folder tucked at the back of the filing cabinet. It was thick, worn, and clearly had been there for years. Curiosity got the best of me, and I opened it. Inside were several envelopes, each one sealed shut with faded red wax. They were clearly old, some of them yellowed with age. My first thought was that they were just old business documents or personal letters. But as I flipped through them, one name caught my eye. It was a woman's name. My father's handwriting appeared on the envelope, and the handwriting inside was clearly his as well. There was something about the way the words were written, an intimacy I hadn't ever seen in my dad's letters before. My heart started to race. I'd never seen anything like this in all the years I'd known him. I unfolded the first letter and began reading it. It started with an apology, but it was the kind of apology you'd give to someone you loved deeply. The kind of apology you'd give if you were confessing to something that weighed on your soul. The words that followed were even more shocking. The letter was filled with stories of passion, regret, and a deep connection that I could never have imagined. I stopped reading, my mind spinning. Could it be true? Could my dad, my hero, have been hiding something from me all these years? I couldn't wrap my head around it, but I knew I couldn't stop now. I had to know more. I read through each letter, some of them written over the course of several months, each one more revealing than the last. They spoke of a secret relationship my father had had, a relationship that had existed while he was still married to my mother. The more I read, the more it became clear. My father had been living a double life. I sat in my father's office, the letters scattered around me like evidence in a courtroom. My heart was pounding, my hands shaking as I tried to process what I had just read. The man I had admired for so long, the one I had trusted with every ounce of my being, had betrayed our family in a way I never thought possible. How could he have done this? How could he have kept this secret from us for so many years? I thought back to my childhood, to all the times I had looked up to him. He was my hero, my protector. He had always been the one I could count on. But now, in the face of this truth, I felt like I didn't know who he really was. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to scream, to confront him right then and there. But part of me that had always been so attached to the man he had been, was frozen with fear. Fear of the truth, fear of what it would mean for my family, for my relationship with him. I had no idea how to approach him. How could I even begin to explain what I had found? The thought of confronting him was unbearable. But I knew I couldn't just ignore it. I had to know why. Why did he do it? Why did he keep this secret from all of us? After what felt like hours of sitting in the silence of his office, I finally made up my mind. I had to confront him. But how? Where do you even begin when you're about to challenge the person who's been the foundation of your entire life? I texted my father to let him know I wanted to talk. My hands trembled as I hit send. He responded quickly, asking me to meet him at the house. I felt a wave of anxiety rush over me. I wasn't ready for this conversation, but I knew it was inevitable. When I walked into our living room later that evening, my father was sitting in his chair, his usual calm demeanor replaced with a look of uncertainty. The man I had always seen as unshakable was now the one looking for reassurance. He stood up when I entered, his eyes meeting mine. He knew this conversation was coming. He had to. "Sit down," he said quietly, motioning to the couch. "I know what this is about." I took a seat, my heart racing. I wasn't sure how to start, so I just said it, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. I found the letters. His face went pale, and for the first time in my life, I saw fear in his eyes. I had never seen him look vulnerable before, but now, in this moment, he was completely exposed. He sat down across from me, his hands clasped together tightly. "I didn't want you to find those," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was trying to protect you." "Protect me?" I echoed, my voice shaking with emotion. "How could you protect me by keeping this secret? How could you protect any of us?" He looked away, his gaze fixed on the floor. "It was a mistake. I never meant for it to happen. I never wanted to hurt your mother, or you." I stared at him, my heart aching with confusion and anger. "How long, Dad? How long did this go on?" "A few years," he replied quietly, not meeting my eyes. "I was lost. I made a mistake, and I didn't know how to fix it. So I kept it hidden." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My father, the man who had always taught me to face my problems head on, had spent years hiding this, hiding it from me, from my mother, from everyone. "I don't know how to look at you the same way anymore," I said, the pain in my voice evident. "How could you lie to us for so long?" "I never wanted to hurt you," he said again, his voice cracking. "But I didn't know how to fix it. I thought that if I kept it hidden, I could protect the family from the truth. I didn't want to lose everything." "But you did," I whispered, my throat tightening. "You lost everything." My father's words hung in the air, heavy and full of regret. The silence that followed felt suffocating, the weight of his confession crushing me under its enormity. I wanted to scream, to throw something at him, to somehow express the storm of emotions that were swirling inside me. But all I could do was sit there, stunned and heartbroken, unable to process what I was hearing. "You don't understand," my father continued, his voice growing more desperate. "I was in a place where I felt alone. Your mother, she wasn't the same anymore, and I didn't know how to handle it." The words felt like daggers. The image of my parents, who I had always believed had the perfect marriage, was shattered in an instant. My mother, who I thought had been my father's one and only, had apparently not been enough to stop him from straying. I couldn't wrap my mind around it. The betrayal went deeper than just the affair. It was the deception, the years of lying and hiding, the family that had been built on a foundation of falsehoods. "You're telling me this now?" I asked, my voice shaking. "After all these years, this is when you decide to tell me the truth. You think I'm just going to forgive you and move on?" He was quiet for a long moment, staring at the floor as though the weight of his actions was finally catching up with him. "I never wanted you to know," he said quietly. "I never wanted you to be involved in any of this, but I know now that keeping this from you was a mistake, and I'm sorry, more than you can ever understand." Tears began to well in my eyes, and I quickly wiped them away. I couldn't cry, not yet. I wasn't ready to fall apart. "How could you think this was okay? How could you think lying to us for years was okay?" My father's face crumpled, the stoic man I had once idolized now reduced to a broken figure before me. "I made a terrible mistake," he said, his voice barely audible. "I hurt the two people I loved most in the world, and I don't know how to fix it. I can't undo what I've done, but I can tell you this. I am truly sorry." The words felt hollow, like empty promises he had made to himself for years. The more I listened, the more the anger inside me grew. "Sorry doesn't fix this," I snapped, standing up. "Sorry doesn't take away the fact that you've destroyed everything we had." He looked up at me, his eyes pleading. "Please, I understand if you can't forgive me, but I need you to know that I am truly remorseful." I felt my hands trembling as I clenched them into fists. The anger, the betrayal, the hurt, it was all bubbling to the surface. I didn't know what I was supposed to feel. Was I supposed to forgive him? Could I ever trust him again? I took a step back, feeling the weight of the years of love and trust we had shared come crashing down around me. "I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way again," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I thought you were my hero, but now I see you for what you really are." With those words, I turned and walked out of the room, leaving my father sitting in the silence of his regret. The anger inside me was replaced with an overwhelming sense of loss. I had lost my father, the man I had once looked up to, and I didn't know if I would ever be able to get him back. The days following that conversation were a blur. I went through the motions, work, meals, sleep, but everything felt hollow. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my father's face, his admission of guilt hanging over me like a cloud I couldn't escape. It was like I was trapped in a world that no longer made sense. The man I had called my hero, the man I thought could do no wrong, had been living a lie for years, and now I was left with the wreckage of everything I had believed to be true. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. How could he betray my mother like that? How could he live a double life, hiding the truth from all of us for so long? My father's remorse, no matter how genuine it seemed, couldn't undo the damage. It couldn't fix the hurt he had caused. I found myself withdrawing from my mother as well. She had no idea about any of it. No idea that her husband had been unfaithful. No idea that the man she trusted with her heart had been living a secret life. I couldn't bear to look at her without feeling guilty. How could I tell her? How could I break her heart by revealing the truth about the man she had loved for so many years? I didn't know what to do. I couldn't face either of them. I couldn't look at my mother without seeing the image of my father's betrayal in my mind. And I couldn't look at my father without feeling the deep sense of betrayal he had caused me. I needed to escape. I needed to get away from all of it, from the suffocating weight of the truth. So I left for a few days. I packed a bag and went to stay with a friend in another city, hoping that some time away would give me the space I needed to process everything. But no matter how far I drove, the thoughts of my father's betrayal followed me. The anger, the confusion, the heartbreak, it was like a storm that wouldn't pass. When I finally returned home, I knew I had to make a decision. I couldn't keep running. I had to face my father, face the truth, and figure out what to do next. I wasn't sure if I was ready, but I knew it was the only way forward. I came back home with a heavy heart, but a resolution to finally confront my father once and for all. The space I had taken, the time I had spent away, gave me clarity, but also a deep sense of anger and confusion. The questions I had been avoiding for weeks now demanded answers. I couldn't pretend that everything was fine anymore. I couldn't go on living in a house built on a lie. It was time to face the truth, no matter how much it hurt. When I arrived at home, I found my father sitting in his usual chair by the window, staring out at the yard. He didn't seem surprised to see me. He knew I would eventually come back, but I could see the guilt still hanging on him like a cloud. He looked smaller now, the man who had once seemed so strong and unshakable, now reduced to a shell of the person I had looked up to. We sat in silence for a moment, neither of us knowing what to say first. It was my father who broke the silence, his voice hoarse. "I know this isn't easy for you," he said quietly. "I never wanted to hurt you, and I know I've already lost your trust." I looked at him, my heart heavy. "You don't just lose my trust, Dad. You've broken everything. The way I saw you, the way I saw our family, it's all been shattered." My voice trembled, but I couldn't stop it. The pain, the betrayal, it was all too much. I know," he whispered, his eyes downcast. "I'll never be able to take back what I've done, but I need you to know that I regret it every single day. I was weak, and I made choices that I can never undo." I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time in my life, I didn't see the strong, capable father I had always admired. I saw a man who had broken his own moral compass, a man who had destroyed everything in pursuit of something he thought would make him happy. And in the process, he had hurt everyone who mattered most. "You say you regret it," I said, the bitterness in my voice unmistakable. "But regret doesn't fix what you've done. It doesn't fix the hurt you've caused." "I know," he replied, his voice breaking. "I wish I could change everything, but I can't. All I can do now is ask for your forgiveness, and I know I don't deserve it. But I'm asking, even if I know it may never come." I was silent for a long time, my mind racing. Was I ready to forgive him? Could I forgive him? The anger inside me was still raw, still fresh. But as I sat there, looking at him, something in me shifted. Maybe it wasn't about forgiveness, at least not yet. Maybe it was about finding peace for myself, about moving forward without letting his mistakes define my future. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Dad," I said softly. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to, but I know I can't keep carrying this anger with me. I need to heal, and I need space to do that." He nodded, his face etched with regret. "I understand," he said quietly, "and I'll give you all the space you need. I just hope one day you'll be able to find it in your heart to forgive me." The silence that followed was deafening, but it was a silence that felt like the first step toward healing, for both of us. I stood up, my body feeling heavier than when I had sat down. I didn't know what would come next, but for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was taking control of my life again. My father's mistakes didn't have to define me. I didn't have the answers yet, but I was finally ready to find them. The days that followed were some of the hardest of my life. I didn't know how to move forward. The anger I felt toward my father was still there, but something else had begun to settle in, something heavier and more painful. Disappointment. Betrayal. I couldn't ignore the fact that my family had been built on secrets, on a foundation that I now saw as fragile. For weeks I struggled with the idea of confronting my mother. She had no idea about my father's affair, and now I had to figure out if I was willing to destroy the last bit of innocence she had left. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about my mother, too. She deserved to know the truth. But could I really break her heart like that? I wasn't sure I was ready to be the one to tell her. I spent the next few days reflecting on everything. I thought about my father and his regret. I thought about the years we had shared as a family, the good times, the love we had shown each other. And I thought about how, despite the pain, I could never undo the love I had for him. But love and trust were two different things, and trust had been shattered beyond repair. The moment came when my mother and I were sitting at the kitchen table, having one of our usual Sunday dinners. She was asking me about work, about my life, and I couldn't bring myself to look her in the eye. I kept hearing my father's voice in my head, his apology, his regret. But I knew I couldn't keep this from her. She deserved to know. "Mom," I started, my voice shaky. "There's something I need to tell you." She looked up at me, concern in her eyes. "What's wrong, sweetheart? You look like you've seen a ghost." I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm that was rising in my chest. "It's about Dad. There's something you need to know, something I found out recently." Her face immediately shifted from concern to confusion. "What do you mean? What's going on with your father?" I paused for a moment, gathering my thoughts. I didn't know how to say this, didn't know how to make her understand the depth of what I had learned, but I knew I had to try. "I found letters, Mom, letters from someone else, from another woman." My words came out in a rush, as if saying them quickly would make the truth less painful. Dad was having an affair. For years, the words hung in the air like a heavy fog, suffocating everything around them. My mother's face drained of color as she stared at me, her eyes wide in shock. "What?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. No, that's not possible. He wouldn't do that." "I'm sorry, Mom," I said softly, my heart breaking for her. "But it's true. He has been hiding it from you, from all of us." Her hands shook as she put down her fork, her gaze fixed on the table. "I don't understand," she murmured. "I don't know how to process this. How could he do this to me, to our family?" I reached across the table, placing my hand on hers. "I don't have all the answers, but I want you to know that none of this is your fault. You didn't deserve this." She nodded, tears filling her eyes. "I trusted him. I built my whole life with him. How could he betray me like this?" I didn't have an answer. How could I explain something so deep, so complex? How could I explain how someone I had trusted so deeply could destroy the very thing we had built? We sat in silence for what felt like hours, neither of us knowing what to say next. The truth had been laid bare, and there was no turning back now. The silence between us was unbearable, and I could see my mother struggling to hold herself together. Her hands trembled as she wiped her eyes, trying to regain some composure. I could feel the weight of what I had just done, the weight of exposing my father's secret. It felt like the entire foundation of our family had just crumbled beneath us, and now we were left to pick up the pieces. "I never wanted you to know this," I said softly, my voice shaking. "I didn't want to hurt you, but I knew you needed to know the truth. I couldn't keep it from you anymore." My mother nodded, but she didn't speak right away. She just sat there, her mind clearly racing, trying to process what I had just told her. The hurt in her eyes was too much to bear. "I don't know what to say," she finally whispered, her voice barely audible. "How could I not see this? How could I have been so blind? How long has this been going on?" I paused, trying to figure out how to answer her without making things worse. "It's been going on for years, Mom. I don't know all the details, but I found the letters, and I just couldn't pretend like nothing was happening." She let out a shaky breath and looked down at her hands. I could see the shock and pain in her eyes. All these years, I thought we had a good life, she said, her voice breaking. I thought we had everything, that we were happy. How could he do this to me? To us? I didn't know how to answer her. There were no words that could undo the hurt she was feeling, no words that could make her feel better. I could see how deeply this was affecting her, how everything she thought she knew about her life was now upended. We can't change what's happened, but we can decide what to do next, I said, trying to offer some semblance of hope. You don't have to make any decisions right now. Just take time to process everything. And when you're ready, we'll figure out how to move forward. She didn't respond right away, but I could see the wheels turning in her mind. After a few moments, she stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the yard as if she were looking for some kind of answer. I don't know what I'm supposed to do, she said quietly, her voice barely audible. How can I live with this? How can I trust him again after everything? I stood up and walked over to her, placing my hand on her shoulder. You don't have to decide today, Mom. You don't have to decide anything right now. Take your time. I'm here for you, no matter what you decide. She nodded slowly, but I could see that the pain was still there, clouding her judgment. She was torn between love and betrayal, between the life she had built with my father and the truth that had just been revealed to her. I never imagined this, she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. I thought we were a team. I thought we were in this together, but now I see that he's been living a lie, and I don't know if I can ever trust him again. The words hung in the air, and I realized that my mother's heartbreak was far deeper than I had ever anticipated. It wasn't just about the affair, it was about everything that had been built on a lie, everything she had believed in for all these years, and now she had to face the truth. And so did I. The days after our conversation were filled with a strange kind of stillness. My mother withdrew into herself, processing the truth in her own way. I tried to give her space, but I couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation on my shoulders. Every time I saw my father, I was reminded of the betrayal he had caused, and my anger flared up again. But I didn't know how to address it. How could I confront him when everything had already been said? I couldn't bring myself to face him in the same way. The man I had once idolized seemed distant, a shadow of the father I had known all my life. I couldn't just pretend like everything was fine. After a week of avoiding him, I finally sat down with my father again. We met in the same place where I had confronted him before, the living room. But this time, I had no words to offer. The anger I had felt before was replaced by a quiet sadness, a deep ache in my chest. "Have you talked to Mom?" I asked, my voice softer than I expected. He nodded slowly, his eyes downcast. "We've talked. She's taking it hard, but I know she needs time. I've asked her for forgiveness, but I don't think she's ready for that yet." I looked at him, unsure of how to respond. The man sitting in front of me was the same person who had been a part of my life for so long. But now I saw him as someone else, someone who had made a choice that changed everything. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, his voice full of regret. "I never wanted to hurt any of you. I thought I could keep this hidden, that I could protect the family from the truth. But I see now that it's not about protection. It's about honesty. It's about trust. And I broke that trust." I felt a lump form in my throat, but I fought back the tears. "It's going to take time, Dad. I don't know if I can forgive you right now. I'm angry and I'm hurt. You've hurt Mom more than you'll ever know, but I don't know what else to say." He looked at me, his eyes pleading. "I understand. I don't expect you to forgive me immediately. I just want you to know that I'm willing to do whatever it takes to rebuild the trust I've lost. And if that means giving you space, I'll do that." I nodded, unsure of what to say next. It felt like we were both stuck in a limbo, unsure of how to move forward. But I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't go back to the way things were. I couldn't go back to seeing him as the man who had always been there for me. Now, he was someone I would have to learn to trust again. The weeks that followed were a mixture of painful reflection and quiet acceptance. My mother and I continued to talk, and though the subject of my father's betrayal was never far from our minds, there was an unspoken understanding between us. She was hurt, but she was also trying to process everything in her own way. She hadn't made any decisions yet about her future with my father, and I knew that the choice she faced was one of the hardest anyone could make. But I also knew it wasn't my decision to make. It was hers. I spent a lot of time reflecting on everything that had happened. The anger I had felt toward my father was still there, but it had begun to fade into something else, something more complicated. I didn't know if I could ever fully forgive him for what he had done, but I knew that holding on to the anger forever would only hurt me more. As I started to let go of the resentment, I realized that I needed to focus on my own healing. I couldn't keep waiting for someone else's apology or change to move forward. I had to take control of my own life again, and that meant letting go of the past. I began to rebuild my own sense of self, slowly but surely, with each day that passed. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. One day while I was out running errands, I ran into my father. He was sitting on a bench outside a cafe, reading a book. He looked up when I walked by, and for a moment, we just stood there, staring at each other. I wasn't sure what to do, but I felt a strange calm wash over me. We had both been through so much, and maybe it wasn't about finding the perfect solution. Maybe it was about learning how to move forward from the wreckage of what we had lost. "Hi," he said softly, breaking the silence. "Hi," I replied, my voice steady. "How are you?" He smiled weakly, the lines on his face deeper than before. "I'm getting by, one day at a time." We stood there for a few moments, neither of us saying anything. The tension between us was still there, but it didn't feel as suffocating as it once had. It felt like we were both learning how to breathe again. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened," I said finally, my voice quieter now. "And I don't know if I'll ever completely forgive you, but I think I'm starting to accept that the past can't be changed." He nodded slowly, his eyes filled with regret. "I understand, and I don't expect forgiveness right away. I just want you to know that I'm sorry for everything." "I know," I said, my voice softer now. "And maybe one day we can rebuild something. Maybe not the way it was, but something new, something that's honest." He smiled at that, a small glimmer of hope in his eyes. "I'd like that." We stood there for a few more moments, neither of us in a hurry to walk away. There was a lot still unsaid between us, but for the first time in a long while, it felt like we were both ready to begin the process of moving on. As I walked away, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't realized I needed. The journey of healing wasn't over, and I wasn't sure where it would take me, but I knew that for the first time in a long time, I was no longer weighed down by the past. It was time to look forward. In the end, I learned that healing doesn't happen overnight. It's a process, a messy, painful, and often confusing journey that takes time. But I also learned that you have the power to take control of your own healing, no matter how much pain others may have caused you. If you've been through a similar betrayal or heartbreak, I'd love to hear your story. How did you find the strength to move forward? How did you begin to heal? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And remember, you're not alone in this journey.